Close your eyes and drift back through time. Not hundreds of years, not even a single millennium, but thousands upon thousands of years before the rise of the Galactic Empire. Before Darth Vader breathed through his mask, before Emperor Palpatine schemed in the shadows, before the Clone Wars tore the galaxy apart, there existed an age of legends, an age when the Sith weren't hiding in secrecy, but ruled openly as emperors and dark lords, an age when the Force flowed through conflicts that shaped the very foundation of everything that would come after. This is the Old Republic era, a time when Jedi and Sith waged wars that consumed entire star systems, when ancient sorceries twisted reality itself, when warriors bearing lightsabers numbered in the thousands, not just a scattered few. The stories from this time feel almost mythological now, preserved in dusty archives and half-forgotten legends. But every myth begins with truth, and the truth of the Old Republic is darker and more fascinating than any story ever invented. Let your breathing slow and steady. Feel yourself sinking deeper into relaxation as we journey back to the very beginning, to the moment when the Sith were born from betrayal and ambition. The tale we're about to explore spans over 3,000 years of galactic history, filled with heroes who became villains, villains who sought redemption, and empires that rose from ashes, only to crumble once more. The 100-year darkness and the birth of the Sith. Around 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Jedi Order stood as the guardians of peace and justice throughout the galaxy. They served the Galactic Republic, using the light side of the Force to protect the innocent and maintain balance. But even among the most righteous, seeds of corruption can take root. A philosophical divide began to fracture the Order from within. Some Jedi grew restless with the restrictions placed upon them by the Council. They questioned why certain knowledge was forbidden, why certain powers were locked away. These dissidents believed that true understanding of the Force could only come through studying all its aspects, not just the light. They craved the strength that came from passion, from emotion, from the raw power that the dark side offered. The Jedi Council forbade this line of thinking, recognizing the danger. The dark side corrupts, they warned. It consumes those who wield it, turning noble intentions into selfish desires. But their warnings fell on deaf ears. The rebellious Jedi refused to abandon their pursuit of forbidden knowledge. This disagreement erupted into the Second Great Schism, a civil war within the Jedi Order itself. The rogue Jedi didn't simply leave peacefully. They embraced practices that horrified their former brothers and sisters. Sith alchemy twisted living creatures into monsters. Dark rituals reshaped flesh and bone according to unnatural designs. These fallen Jedi rejected everything the Order stood for, choosing passion over serenity, strength over compassion, power over wisdom. Among the leaders of this dark rebellion stood several figures who would become legendary in Sith lore. Ajunta Pall was a warrior of exceptional skill, whose lightsaber technique was matched only by his ambition. Karnas Moore delved into forbidden techniques that would echo through millennia. Soxon accumulated knowledge of the dark side that exceeded nearly anyone else of his time. These weren't mindless monsters. They were intelligent, powerful Force users who genuinely believed their path was the correct one. The philosophical foundation they established would define the Sith for thousands of years to come. They believed that conflict was necessary for growth, that through struggle, the strong would rise and claim their rightful place, while the weak would fall away. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake, in their view, but the natural order of things. Peace and harmony, they argued, led to stagnation. Only through constant challenge and competition could true power be achieved. The 100-year darkness began in earnest as these dark Jedi gathered followers and launched attacks against the Jedi Order and the Republic. For an entire century, Battles raged across countless worlds. The scale of destruction was unprecedented. Where the Jedi sought to protect life, the Dark Jedi saw populations as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be eliminated. The dark alchemists among them created abominations that still haunt legends. Monstrous creatures born from their twisted experiments prowled battlefields, living weapons designed to terrorize and destroy. These beasts were fusion of dark side sorcery and genetic manipulation, things that should never have existed. Entire planets fell to these horrors as the Dark Jedi pushed deeper into Republic space. But despite their power, despite their horrifying creations, the Dark Jedi were ultimately outnumbered. The Jedi Order mobilized its full strength. More importantly, the Republic threw its military might behind the Jedi cause. World after world was reclaimed. The Dark Jedi forces were pushed back, compressed, and finally cornered. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Corvus around 6,900 years before Yavin. There, on that forgotten battlefield, the combined forces of the Jedi Order and the Republic military defeated the Dark Jedi Rebellion. Thousands of Darksiders lay dead. Their alchemical monsters were destroyed or scattered. Their dreams of a new order built on dark side principles seemed to have died with them. The surviving Dark Jedi were captured, disarmed, and stripped of their possessions. The Jedi Council then faced a crucial decision. They could execute these fallen Jedi, ending the threat permanently. Or they could show mercy, giving them a chance at redemption. The Council chose what they believed was the merciful path. They loaded the surviving Dark Jedi onto unarmed transport vessels and exiled them from Republic space, casting them into the unknown regions with no way home and no weapons to threaten the galaxy again. It seemed like wisdom at the time. It was, in fact, one of the greatest mistakes in galactic history. That act of mercy would reshape everything that came after. Discovery of Korriban and the First Sith Empire. The exiled Dark Jedi drifted through the unknown regions for weeks, perhaps months. Their ships had supplies, but no weapons, no charts to guide them home, and no welcome waiting even if they could find their way back. Many must have despaired. Some perhaps regretted their choices, wondering if they should have submitted to the Jedi Council's judgment, instead of facing this slow death in the void. Then their sensors detected a habitable world, a desert planet with a breathable atmosphere, orbiting a distant sun in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. They had no choice but to investigate. Their supplies were running low, and death in space seemed inevitable otherwise. So they guided their crippled ships toward this unknown world. The planet was called Korriban, and it would become the heart of darkness for the next 1,000 years. Korriban was home to a primitive species who called themselves the Sith. They were humanoid, with red skin and distinctive facial features that set them apart from the humans of the Republic. These native Sith possessed a natural connection to the Force, though they understood it only as a form of magic, not the cosmic energy field that the exiled Jedi knew it to be. The Sith species had developed a civilization built around warrior castes and sorcerer kings. They fought among themselves in endless tribal conflicts, their society stratified into rigid hierarchies, where the strong ruled and the weak served. When the ships carrying the exiled Dark Jedi descended from the sky, landing on their red sands, the native Sith witnessed something beyond their understanding. These pale-skinned strangers wielded powers that made their own sorcerer priests look like children playing with toys. The Dark Jedi demonstrated abilities that seemed godlike to the Sith people. Telekinesis lifted massive stones without effort. Lightning arced from fingertips, the very fabric of reality bent to their will. The Dark Jedi recognized opportunity when they saw it. They presented themselves not as refugees, but as gods come to rule. The native Sith, already accustomed to social hierarchies based on power, accepted this without question. These beings from the sky clearly possessed more strength than any of their own rulers. By the logic of their culture, the newcomers deserved to lead. Ajunta Pal emerged as the dominant force among the exiled Dark Jedi. He was the most powerful, the most skilled, and the most ambitious. When the various tribes of the Sith species gathered to pay homage to their new gods, it was Ajunta Pal who stood above all others. He declared himself the first Dark Lord of the Sith, establishing a title that would be passed down through generations. The term Sith itself came from the native species they now ruled. The Dark Jedi adopted this name, abandoning their identity as fallen Jedi entirely. They were something new now, something that blended the dark side knowledge of the Jedi traditions with the raw, passionate connection to the Force that the native Sith species possessed. Over time, the human Dark Jedi began to intermarry with the native Sith. This wasn't purely a matter of attraction or companionship. By mingling their bloodlines, they strengthened their claim to rule and created a hybrid aristocracy that possessed both the innate Force sensitivity of the Sith species and the trained techniques of the fallen Jedi. Children born from these unions often displayed red skin and facial features reminiscent of the native Sith, combined with the power and knowledge inherited from their Dark Jedi parents. A new culture emerged on Korriban, one that would define the Sith Order for millennia. The architectural style reflected their values. Massive temples built into the desert mountains, tomb valleys where the greatest Dark Lords would be buried with terrible honors, training academies where new generations learned to channel their anger and hatred into power. The Sith established their capital on Korriban, with another major power center on the nearby world of Ziost. They expanded slowly at first, conquering neighboring star systems and incorporating them into their growing empire. This wasn't the Republic's model of voluntary membership and democratic participation. The Sith Empire was built on domination and hierarchy. The strong ruled, the weak obeyed, or were destroyed. At the pinnacle of Sith society stood the Dark Lord, absolute ruler whose word was law. Below them were the Sith Lords, each commanding territories and followers, each constantly scheming for more power while being careful not to challenge the Dark Lord directly. Open rebellion was punishable by death, but competition was not just allowed, but encouraged. The Sith believed that this constant pressure, this need to constantly prove oneself, created strength. It was a philosophy that made perfect sense within their worldview. Weakness was not to be tolerated or pitied, but eliminated. Compassion was seen as a liability that made you vulnerable. Trust was foolishness. Power was the only currency that mattered. These beliefs, born from the fallen Jedi's rejection of the Jedi Code and reinforced by the native Sith culture, would echo through every iteration of the Sith Order that followed. Slavery was common throughout the Sith Empire. Those conquered in war, those who failed to prove their worth, those simply born to the wrong families, all could find themselves in chains. The Sith Lords used slave labor to build their monuments, to work their fields, to serve their every whim. To the Sith, this was not cruelty but logic, the strong taking what they deserved from the weak. For roughly 1,000 years, this first Sith Empire grew in isolation from the Republic. The Jedi Order had no idea what their mercy had created. The Republic continued to expand and prosper in ignorance, believing the threat of the Dark Jedi had been eliminated. They had no way of knowing that on the other side of the galaxy, a rival civilization was developing, one built entirely on the principles the Jedi opposed. During this millennium of isolation, several Sith Lords rose to legendary status through their conquests and achievements. Tulak Hord was remembered as perhaps the greatest warrior of the early Sith Empire. His mastery of lightsaber combat was unmatched in his time, and his knowledge of Sith sorcery let him augment his physical abilities to superhuman levels. Horde-led campaigns that brought dozens of star systems under Sith control. He discovered and conquered the world of Dromund Kaas, a planet shrouded in perpetual storms that would later serve as a refuge for the Sith in darker times. Others contributed to Sith knowledge in different ways. Some pioneered new applications of alchemy, creating more sophisticated and terrible transformations of life. Others developed techniques for extending their lives beyond natural limits, or for binding their spirits to objects and locations after death. The tombs of Korriban became repositories of power, where the ghosts of ancient Sith lords sometimes lingered, offering knowledge to those brave or foolish enough to seek them out. The Sith built a civilization unlike anything else in the galaxy. Where the Republic valued harmony and cooperation, the Sith valued strength and competition. Where the Jedi sought to suppress their emotions, the Sith embraced them, channeling passion and anger into raw power. Where the Republic elected leaders, the Sith followed whoever could seize and hold power through force. This was the world into which Marka Ragnos was born, a world of dark power and ancient traditions. And he would become the one to take it all further than anyone before him. The Golden Age, under Marka Ragnos. By around 5100 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Sith Empire had reached what historians would later call its Golden Age. This era of unprecedented prosperity and power was embodied in one figure, Dark Lord Marka Ragnos, whose reign would last over a century and set the standard by which all future Sith rulers would be measured. Ragnos was a half-breed, his lineage mixing the original human Dark Jedi with the native Sith species. This gave him a distinctive appearance that marked him as true Sith nobility. Red skin, pronounced features that echoed his alien heritage, and eyes that burned with the dark side's power. But it wasn't his appearance that made Ragnos legendary. It was his mind. Previous Dark Lords had ruled through raw power, crushing opposition and demanding obedience through fear. Ragnos understood that such tactics, while effective in the short term, created instability. Ambitious Sith Lords were always watching for any sign of weakness, always ready to strike if they sensed an opportunity. Most Dark Lords were eventually betrayed or overthrown, their reigns measured in years or decades at most. Ragnos took a different approach. He recognized that the Sith nature, the constant hunger for more power, the competitive drive that defined their culture, couldn't be suppressed without weakening the very thing that made the Sith strong. So instead of trying to suppress it, he channeled it. When two ambitious Sith Lords seemed to be growing too powerful, Ragnos would pit them against each other. He would grant one a lucrative territory, then give the other a nearby holding with implied promise that expansion was allowed. The two lords would focus their competitive energy on each other instead of on challenging the Dark Lord. When one emerged victorious, Ragnos would evaluate them. If they had grown too powerful or too ambitious, he would find a way to eliminate them that looked like natural consequences of their actions, rather than his machinations. If they had proven their worth without becoming a threat, he would reward them with position and prestige that bound them more closely to his rule. It was a delicate balance, requiring constant attention and manipulation. Ragnos had to be aware of every major power player in his empire, every alliance being formed, every grudge being nursed. He maintained a network of spies and informants that would make any intelligence agency envious. He knew who hated whom, who owed whom favors, who harbored ambitions beyond their station. But Ragnos wasn't just a manipulator. He was also genuinely powerful in combat and in the Force. When challenges to his rule did occur, and they did, because this was the Sith, he met them with overwhelming force. His lightsaber skills were formidable, his command of Sith sorcery extensive. Those who directly opposed him didn't just lose political battles. They lost everything. Under his guidance, the Sith Empire expanded its borders significantly. New star systems were brought into the fold through conquest or occasionally through diplomacy backed by implicit threats. Ragnos understood that not every problem needed to be solved with violence. Sometimes the threat of violence, the reputation of overwhelming power, could achieve the same results with less expenditure of resources. The wealth of the Empire grew during Ragnos' rule. Trade routes were established between Sith worlds, carefully controlled to benefit the ruling class, while keeping potentially rebellious systems dependent on the core worlds. Taxes flowed into Korriban and Ziost, funding the construction of ever more impressive temples and monuments. The architectural achievements of this era would endure for thousands of years, testament to the heights the Sith reached under Ragnos. The Dark Lord also encouraged the advancement of Sith knowledge. Sorcerers and alchemists were given resources to conduct their research, with the understanding that their discoveries would serve the Empire. New Force techniques were developed and codified. The application of Sith alchemy became more sophisticated, creating not just monsters, but sometimes useful hybrid creatures that could serve specific purposes. The understanding of how to bind one's spirit after death was refined, though Ragnos himself seemed content to accept mortality when his time came. The native Sith species continued to decline during this period through interbreeding with human bloodlines, but their genetic contributions remained visible in the aristocracy. Red skin, distinctive facial features, and a natural connection to the dark side became markers of status. Pure-blooded Sith were increasingly rare, treasured for their genetic heritage, even if they weren't necessarily the most powerful Force users. For over 100 years, Marka Ragnos maintained this delicate balance. He was strong enough that no one could successfully challenge him directly, yet subtle enough that ambitious Sith lords had outlets for their competitive drives that didn't threaten his rule. He rewarded loyalty and competence, while ruthlessly eliminating genuine threats. He embodied what a Sith could achieve through not just power, but also intelligence and strategic thinking. But even the greatest rulers are mortal. Even the longest reigns must eventually end. Around 5,000 years before Yavin, age finally claimed what no enemy ever could. Marka Ragnos died, and with his death, the stability he had so carefully maintained began to fracture. The transition of power in the Sith Empire was never peaceful. The position of Dark Lord couldn't be inherited through bloodlines or appointed through legal mechanisms. The Sith way demanded that the strongest take the throne, proving their worth through victory. When Ragnos died, every powerful Sith Lord in the Empire had to consider, was this their moment? Two figures emerged as the primary contenders, both members of the Sith Council, both powerful in the Force, both convinced they deserved to rule. Their names were Nagasato and Ludo Kresh, and the conflict between them would reshape galactic history in ways neither could have imagined. Nagasato and the Great Hyperspace War. Nagasato was a visionary, a Sith Lord who looked beyond the borders of the known Sith Empire and saw opportunity. He believed that the Empire had grown complacent during Ragnos' long reign. Yes, they had achieved stability and prosperity, but they had also become isolated, content to rule their corner of the galaxy, while the vast majority of inhabited space remained beyond their influence. Sado argued for aggressive expansion, for launching campaigns of conquest that would bring the Sith Empire to its rightful place as rulers of the entire galaxy. Ludo Kresh, in contrast, was a conservative and traditionalist. He had served Ragnos loyally and learned from his example. Kresh believed that the Empire's strength came from careful consolidation of power, from not overextending their resources. He feared that Sado's ambitions would lead them into conflicts they couldn't win, stretching their forces too thin and ultimately weakening the Empire. Better to maintain what they had, Kresh argued. and expand only when victory was certain. Both had their supporters among the Sith Lords. The younger, more ambitious ones gravitated towards Sado's vision of conquest and glory. The older, more experienced ones tended to side with Kresh, having seen what happened when ambition outpaced wisdom. The Sith Council was divided, unable to choose between them. The funeral of Marka Ragnos became the stage where this rivalry turned from political maneuvering into open conflict. Ragnos would be entombed in the Valley of the Dark Lords, on Korriban, in a monument befitting his status. The entire Sith aristocracy gathered for the ceremony. Sadao arrived with his supporters, a show of force meant to demonstrate his power. Kresh came with his own loyalists, equally determined to claim the throne. What began as verbal sparring, barbed comments about who was better suited to lead, whose vision would serve the Empire, quickly escalated. Insults became threats. Threats became challenges. And then, before the assembled mourners, before the tomb of the fallen Dark Lord, Naga Sado and Ludo Kresh drew their lightsabers. The duel was fierce. Both were masters of lightsaber combat. Both augmented their physical abilities with the Force. Energy blades clashed with thunderous impact. The dark side swirled around them, feeding on their anger and ambition. Their supporters watched, knowing that this duel would determine the Empire's future. Then, something happened that no one expected. The spirit of Marka Ragnos appeared. Whether it was truly the ghost of the dead Dark Lord, or some kind of psychic projection created by the intense force energies in that place, witnesses agreed on what they saw. A spectral figure materialized, wearing the face and form of Ragnos. The apparition spoke with the voice of their fallen emperor, and its words carried both warning and prophecy. The dueling Sith Lords froze, lightsabers still ignited but held at their sides. Ragnos' spirit told them that their actions threatened everything the Empire had built. The Sith's greatest strength had always been unity in the face of external threats. Internal conflict was necessary for growth, yes, but open civil war at this moment would be disastrous. The Ghost warned that while the future held great potential for the Sith, it also contained terrible risks. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the spirit vanished, leaving only silence and the stunned faces of the Sith Lords. The duel ended without resolution. Neither Sadu nor Kresh had been defeated, and neither was willing to concede. They separated, returning to their respective holdings, each continuing to gather support and plot their path to power. The Sith Council remained deadlocked. The succession crisis continued to fester, threatening to tear the Empire apart. Then fate intervened in the most unexpected way. A Republic ship made a wrong jump through hyperspace. The vessel belonged to two explorers, siblings named Gav and Jory Darrigan. They were hyperspace scouts looking for new trade routes that might make them rich. What they found instead was the Sith Empire, stumbling into Sith space purely by accident. Their ship was immediately intercepted and forced to land on Korriban. To most of the Sith leadership, these outsiders were potential spies, threats that needed to be interrogated and eliminated. But Nagasado saw something different. He saw opportunity. If Republic citizens had found their way to Sith space, that meant the route could be traveled in both directions. More importantly, their unexpected arrival gave him the perfect tool to seize power. Sado executed a deception of masterful complexity. He secretly helped the Darrigan siblings escape from their prison cells. Then he staged an elaborate false flag operation, making it appear as though a Republic military force had launched a rescue mission, attacking Sith facilities in the process. He manufactured evidence of Republic aggression, presenting it to the Sith Council along with his interpretation. The Republic clearly knew about the Sith Empire and was preparing for war. The response was predictable.
The Sith Council was outraged at this Republic attack. They needed a wartime leader, someone strong and decisive who could lead them into battle. Naga Sadow presented himself as exactly that leader. He argued passionately for immediate military action, for striking the Republic before they could marshal their forces. Ludo Kresh saw through the manipulation. He recognized Sadow's hand in the supposed Republic attack. But when he tried to expose the deception, he found himself outmaneuvered. Sadow had planned well. Before Kresh could rally his supporters or present evidence of the fraud, Sadow launched a surprise attack on Kresh's fleet. The assault was sudden and overwhelming. Kresh's flagship was destroyed in the opening salvo, seemingly killing him and decapitating his faction's leadership. With his primary rival eliminated, Naga Sadow was crowned Dark Lord of the Sith, with minimal further resistance. Now in absolute control, he prepared for the war he had manufactured. He allowed Jory Darrigan to escape back to Republic space, but not before placing a tracking device on her ship. When she made the jump to hyperspace, fleeing toward home, Sadow's forces could follow her trail directly into the heart of Republic space. The new Dark Lord assembled the greatest armada in Sith history. He gathered warriors from across the Empire, every battle-ready ship, every weapon of war that could be mustered. But Sadow was no fool. He knew the Republic was vast, its military might likely exceeding what the Sith could field. Raw numbers alone wouldn't win this war. Sadow's solution lay in his greatest power, Sith sorcery and battle meditation. He designed a specialized command sphere, a meditation chamber from which he could project his will across vast distances. From this vessel, Sadow would use illusions to multiply the apparent size of his fleet. Ships that didn't exist would appear on enemy sensors. Entire battle groups would seem to materialize from nothing. It was an unprecedented application of force powers, requiring immense concentration and strength. But Sadow believed it would tip the balance in his favor. The Republic had no warning when the Sith Armada emerged from hyperspace. In a coordinated strike that showcased Sadow's strategic brilliance, Sith forces attacked dozens of Republic worlds simultaneously. Coruscant itself came under assault. The galactic capital's defenses stretched to their limits. Koros, Kirek, and other key systems faced the invasion. Republic defenders found themselves fighting enemies on multiple fronts, overwhelmed by what seemed like an unstoppable tide. For the Sith, this was the culmination of 1,000 years of isolation and preparation. It was their chance to avenge the humiliation of their ancestors, the Dark Jedi who had been cast out by the Republic all those centuries ago. It was their opportunity to prove that the dark side was stronger than the light, that the Sith philosophy of power through conflict was superior to the Jedi way of peace. Initial reports suggested overwhelming Sith success. Republic forces fell back on multiple fronts. Planets surrendered rather than face annihilation. It seemed like Naga Sadow's gamble had paid off, like his vision of conquest was becoming reality. But war never follows a simple path, and several factors began to shift momentum away from the Sith invaders.
The Jedi Order rallied faster than Sadow had anticipated. Though they had never faced this particular enemy before, the Jedi proved remarkably adaptive. They recognized the dark side techniques being used against them, and developed countermeasures. Jedi Masters studied the patterns of Sith attacks, and distributed their knowledge throughout the Order. Where Sith sorcery tried to create fear and confusion, Jedi battle meditation countered with clarity and courage. The mystical advantage that Sadow had counted on began to erode. The second factor came from within Sadow's own camp, from someone he had thought he could control. Gav Darrigan, the male explorer who had been captured alongside his sister, had been taken under Naga Sadow's wing. The Dark Lord recognized Force sensitivity in the young man and began training him in Sith techniques, seeing potential for a loyal apprentice. For a time, Gav embraced this new power, intoxicated by abilities he never knew existed. But as Gav witnessed the brutality of the Sith assault on Republic worlds, his loyalty began to waver. These weren't military targets being struck with surgical precision. These were civilian populations being terrorized. Worlds his sister had visited, places with people who had shown them kindness, were burning under Sith bombardment. The disconnect between Sado's rhetoric about strength and honor and the reality of what the Sith were doing became impossible to ignore. In a moment that would alter the entire course of the war, Gav Daragan made his choice. He infiltrated Sado's meditation sphere, the command vessel from which the Dark Lord maintained his battle meditation and illusions. Gav attacked directly, striking at Sado when he was most vulnerable, fully immersed in maintaining the psychic web that coordinated Sith forces across multiple star systems. The disruption was catastrophic. Sado's concentration shattered. The illusions he had been projecting across the battlefield collapsed all at once. Suddenly, Republic defenders realized that many of the Sith ships they'd been fighting were mere phantoms, projections of force power with no physical substance. What had seemed like overwhelming numerical superiority revealed itself to be clever deception. The revelation spread through Republic communications like wildfire. Morale, which had been crumbling under the apparent hopelessness of the situation, surged as commanders realized the enemy could be beaten. The Sith didn't have unlimited forces. They were overextended, their real numbers insufficient to hold all the territories they'd claimed. Republic military forces, bolstered by Jedi support, launched a massive counteroffensive across all fronts. Naga Sado, recognizing that the tide had irrevocably turned, ordered a full retreat. It was the only logical choice. His forces were being defeated in detail, now that the illusions had failed. Staying would mean annihilation. The Sith, Armada, pulled back from Republic space, fighting rearguard actions as they fled toward home, with Republic forces in pursuit. What had begun as a war of conquest had transformed into a desperate flight for survival. Sado's grand vision of Sith domination lay in ruins. Worse, he was returning to Sith space with a damaged, demoralized fleet, having achieved nothing but revealing the location of the Sith Empire to their enemies. Then came another shock. When Sado's battered fleet arrived in orbit around Korriban, they found Ludo Kresh waiting for them. The conservative Sith Lord had survived the attack on his flagship. While Sado was leading the invasion, Kresh had gathered his surviving supporters and seized control of the Sith homeworlds. Now he commanded the orbital defenses, and he had no intention of allowing his rival to return and claim power. The Sith Empire descended into civil war at the worst possible moment. With Republic forces closing in behind them, pursuing the retreating Sith fleet, Sado and Kresh turned their weapons on each other. Ships already damaged from the Republic campaign now faced fire from their own kind. The orbital battle over Korriban was chaotic and vicious, Sith against Sith, while their ancient enemy approached. Sado managed to destroy Kresh's flagship in the fighting, seemingly killing his rival for a second and final time. But the victory was hollow. Before Sado could consolidate any kind of control, Republic warships arrived in the system. The Jedi had tracked the Sith retreat and brought the full might of the Republic military to the Sith, homeworld itself. Caught between the remnants of Kresh's forces and the incoming Republic fleet, Sado made a desperate gamble. He ordered his remaining ships to the Denari Nova system, a nearby binary star cluster. There, using forbidden Sith techniques that required him to channel more dark side power than he had ever attempted, Sado caused one of the massive stars to go supernova. The resulting explosion was apocalyptic. A portion of the pursuing Republic fleet was vaporized instantly. The shockwave disrupted hyperspace routes throughout the region, creating enough chaos for Sadao to escape with his remaining followers. With just a handful of Masasi warriors, genetically modified soldiers bred by the Sith through dark alchemy, Naga Sado fled to the remote jungle moon of Yavin 4. There, hidden in dense tropical forests, the once mighty Dark Lord of the Sith, went into hiding. He built temples using Massassi slave labor, conducted experiments to preserve his knowledge, and waited for an opportunity to return to power. That opportunity would never come in his lifetime. Sadao would eventually die on Yavin 4, but the dark side power he left behind in those temples would linger for thousands of years, waiting to corrupt future generations. Back in Sith space, the Republic showed no mercy. They systematically attacked every Sith stronghold they could find. Korriban, the ancient capital, fell to Republic assault. The massive tomb complexes where Dark Lords had been entombed for centuries were raided, their treasures seized or destroyed. Ziost and other core worlds of the Empire were conquered or devastated. The Jedi were determined to eliminate the Sith threat completely, having seen firsthand the danger these dark side practitioners posed to the galaxy. The native Sith species, already declining in numbers due to centuries of interbreeding with human bloodlines, were decimated in the Republic assault. Those who survived scattered to remote worlds or were forced into hiding. The grand temples and academies that had stood for a millennium were reduced to rubble or left empty, abandoned to the desert winds and the memories of former glory. By the time the Republic forces withdrew, satisfied they had eliminated the threat, the Sith Empire that had flourished for 1,000 years was no more. The year 5000 BBY marked the collapse of the first great Sith civilization. The Republic and the Jedi believed they had achieved total victory, that the Sith Order had been rendered extinct. Historical records from this period speak confidently of the complete destruction of the Sith as a threat to galactic peace. They were catastrophically wrong. Vitiates rise in the ritual of Nathema. Unknown to the Republic forces celebrating their victory, one Sith Lord had neither joined Nagasado's doomed invasion nor fallen in the subsequent Republic assault. His name was Vitiate, though he had been born with a different name entirely, Tenebrae, meaning darkness. Tenebrae's story began on the Scythe world of Medrias in 5113 BBY, and from the very beginning, his life was marked by darkness that transcended even typical Sith cruelty. He was the illegitimate son of Lord Dramath, a Sith noble, born to a simple farming woman. His early childhood was unremarkable, except for one thing: the terrifying power that lay dormant within him. When he was 6 years old, Tenebrae's Force abilities manifested in the worst possible way. In a fit of childish anger, he reached out with the dark side and stopped his father's heart, killing the man who had raised him believing he was the boy's biological father. But Tenebrae didn't stop there. He also killed his mother, the woman who had borne him and hidden the secret of his true parentage. These weren't accidents or tragic manifestations of uncontrolled power. Even at 6 years old, Tenebrae killed deliberately, methodically, with a coldness that suggested something fundamentally wrong with his psyche. He took control of his home village through fear and dark side manipulation. The other villagers, terrified of this child who had murdered his own parents, submitted to his rule. Tenebrae began conducting experiments on them, using them as test subjects for Sith alchemy and Force techniques. By the age of 10, he had tortured and killed thousands of people, transforming his home village into a charnel house of dark side experimentation. Lord Dramath, his true biological father, eventually learned of his illegitimate son's existence and the atrocities he was committing. Dramath traveled to Medrias to confront this child, who bore his blood. Perhaps he thought he could control or eliminate this embarrassing complication. Instead, Tenebrae defeated his father in combat, stripping away Dramath's connection to the Force and imprisoning his spirit for millennia of torment. At 13 years old, having conquered all of Medrias through terror and demonstrated power beyond his years, Tenebrae came before the Dark Lord of the Sith.
Marka Ragnos, at the height of his power, recognized something unprecedented in this young sociopath. Here was someone whose connection to the dark side exceeded anything Ragnos had seen before. The boy had no empathy, no conscience, no attachment to any living being.
He was pure ambition and hunger for power, wrapped in human form. Ragnos christened him Lord Vitiate, and granted him official recognition as the ruler of Medrias, which Vitiate promptly renamed Nathema. For the next century, while Marka Ragnos ruled the Sith Empire and maintained his careful political balance, Vitiate remained on his homeworld, studying the dark side, conducting his experiments, and accumulating knowledge of Sith sorcery that would eventually exceed even the ancient masters. When Nagasado launched his invasion of the Republic, Vitiate watched from afar. He recognized it as a doomed venture, Sado's ambition outpacing his strategic thinking. Vitiate had no interest in glorious conquest or improving the Sith's superiority through military victory. His goals were far more fundamental. He sought immortality, not through crude life extension techniques, but through becoming something beyond mortal existence entirely. As the great hyperspace war turned against the Sith, as the Republic forces pushed into Sith space and began their campaign of extermination, Vitiate saw opportunity in catastrophe. He sent out a call to the surviving Sith lords, those who had neither died in Sado's invasion nor been caught by Republic forces. He promised them salvation, a way to escape the Republic hunters and preserve the Sith Order. Hundreds of Sith lords answered his summons, gathering on Nathema. They came desperately seeking any refuge, any hope of survival. Vitiate welcomed them all, promising a ritual that would grant them the power to defeat their enemies and rebuild the Empire. What he didn't tell them was the true nature of the ritual he planned. The ceremony Vitiate conducted was unprecedented in scope and horror. He linked all the assembled Sith lords into a vast dark side network, connecting their life forces through Sith sorcery. Then, when they were all bound together and vulnerable, he activated the ritual's true purpose. Vitiate drained every single one of them, consuming their life energy in one catastrophic moment. But he didn't stop with the Sith lords. The ritual expanded outward from the gathered Force users, spreading across the entire planet like a wave of annihilation. Every living thing on Nathema died in that instant. Every animal, every plant, every microorganism, every form of life was consumed, its essence torn away and devoured. Even the Force itself was ripped from the planet, leaving a void where connection to that cosmic energy should have been. The planet Nathema became something unique in the galaxy, a wound in the Force itself. Where once there had been life and energy, now there was only absence. Force-sensitive beings would instinctively avoid the system, feeling a wrongness they couldn't explain. The planet became a dead gray wasteland, devoid not just of life, but of the very potential for life. What Vitiate gained from this ritual was extraordinary. He absorbed the life force of not just hundreds of Sith lords, but billions of living beings, the entire biosphere of a planet. This granted him power beyond any Sith who had come before. More importantly, it extended his lifespan indefinitely. He wouldn't just live longer than a normal human, he would effectively become immortal, sustained by the stolen life energy of an entire world. But there was a cost that even Vitiate hadn't fully anticipated. The ritual changed him fundamentally. He became something more than human, but also less. The being that arose from Nathema was no longer truly Tenebrae, or even Lord Vitiate. He became the Sith Emperor, a title that reflected what he had become. A force of darkness given form, sustained by death, driven by an insatiable hunger that could never truly be satisfied. With his newfound power and immortality secured, the Sith Emperor began gathering the scattered remnants of Sith civilization. Around 4,900 BBY, He led the surviving Sith, who hadn't been part of his ritual, into the unknown regions, far beyond the mapped space where the Republic might find them. They traveled through dangerous, uncharted hyperspace routes, guided by the Emperor's visions and his unnatural connection to the dark side. Eventually, they found Dromund Kaas, the world that Tulak Horde had discovered centuries earlier. It was perfect for their needs, located in the unknown regions where Republic scouts wouldn't stumble upon them, shrouded in perpetual storms that helped hide their presence, and rich with dark side energy from ancient Sith rituals Horde had performed there. On Dromund Kaas, the Sith Emperor established his new capital and began building a reconstituted Sith Empire. Where the old empire had been ruled through political maneuvering and the constant threat of usurpation, this new empire would be different. The Emperor established himself as an undisputed, seemingly eternal ruler. His power was so overwhelming, his presence so terrifying, that none of the surviving Sith Lords dared challenge him. He promised his followers that one day, when they were ready, they would return to crush the Republic. But that day wouldn't come soon. First, they needed to rebuild. They needed to train new generations in the ways of the Sith. They needed to develop their strength in secret, patient as stone, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. For the next 1,000 years, while the Republic believed the Sith extinct and the Jedi Order grew complacent in their victory, the hidden Sith Empire on Dromund Kaas expanded and prepared. They built cities that blended Sith architectural traditions with new innovations. They established training academies where young acolytes studied the dark side. They advanced their technology, combining Sith alchemy with more conventional sciences to create weapons and ships beyond what the Republic possessed. All the while, the immortal Emperor watched over them, a dark presence that suffused the entire empire. He ruled not through force of personality or political skill, as Marka Ragnos had, but through sheer overwhelming power that made resistance unthinkable. Those who served him well were rewarded. Those who failed him or showed signs of disloyalty disappeared, their fates serving as warnings to others. The Sith Emperor also began conducting experiments that would make even hardened Sith Lords uncomfortable if they knew the full extent of what he was doing. He researched ways to extend his own power even further, to transcend physical form entirely. He developed techniques that would allow him to dominate minds across vast distances, to possess bodies when his own became inconvenient, to split his consciousness across multiple vessels while maintaining a hidden true form that could survive even if all his other incarnations were destroyed. The galaxy at large had no idea that in the darkness beyond their borders, an ancient enemy was growing stronger. The Republic continued to expand and prosper, believing the threat eliminated. The Jedi eventually forgot the specific lessons they had learned fighting the Sith, the knowledge being lost to comfortable centuries of peace. And on Yavin Forge, Naga Sadow eventually died, but the dark power he had infused into those jungle temples remained, dormant and patient. Thousands of years later, both the Jedi and Sith would be drawn to that moon, to the power waiting there, continuing cycles that began in this ancient era. The Great Hyperspace War marked a turning point in galactic history. It ended the first Sith Empire, scattered the Sith to the winds, and created the conditions for an even more dangerous threat to develop in secret. The legacy of Naga Sadow's ambition and Vitiate's horrifying ritual would echo through millennia, setting patterns that would repeat again and again. The Old Republic era was just beginning to unfold, and the worst was yet to come. The Sith would return again and again, each time learning from the failures of the past, each time finding new ways to threaten the light. And the immortal Emperor on Dromund Kaas would wait, accumulating power, refining his plans, patient in the knowledge that he had all the time in the universe to see his vision come to fruition. Close your eyes and rest now. This is only the first chapter in a tale that spans thousands of years. The ancient Sith Empire has fallen, but from its ashes, darker things are rising. When next we meet, we'll explore how the dark side continued to find new vessels, new champions, new opportunities to challenge the Jedi and the Republic. The legacy of the Sith is never truly ended, only transformed. Welcome back to the darkness of the old Republic era. Let your breathing steady and your mind quiet as we continue our journey through the ancient conflicts that shaped the galaxy. When we left off, the first Sith Empire had fallen, scattered by the Republic's vengeful assault. But the dark side is patient, and it never truly disappears. It waits, lurking in forgotten corners, seeking new champions to carry its corruption forward. Freedon Nad and the Dark Legacy. For 400 years after the Great Hyperspace War, the galaxy believed the Sith were finished. The Republic expanded into new territories. The Jedi Order rebuilt its strength and prepared new generations of Guardians. Peace, though never perfect, seemed more stable than it had been in centuries. The nightmare of the Sith invasion faded from living memory into legend, something studied by historians but not feared by the common citizen. But on Yavin Fort, in temples built by Massassi hands under Nagasado's command, dark power remained. The dead Dark Lord's spirit lingered, bound to the moon through Sith sorcery, waiting for someone worthy of his knowledge. The temples themselves radiated dark side energy, creating a beacon that Force-sensitive beings might sense across vast distances, even if they didn't understand what they were feeling. Around 4,400 BBY, 400 years after Sado's exile, a Jedi Knight named Freedon Nad felt that call. Nad had been a promising student, powerful in the Force and skilled with a lightsaber. But like the Dark Jedi who founded the first Sith Order thousands of years before him, Nad grew frustrated with the Jedi teachings. He craved more power than the light side offered, resented the restrictions placed upon him by the Council, and believed himself destined for greater things than the role of humble guardian the Jedi expected of him. His master, Mada Tremaine, recognized the warning signs but hoped to guide Nad back to the light through patience and wisdom. That hope died when Nad, in a moment of rage and ambition, struck down his own master. The murder shattered whatever remained of Nad's connection to the Jedi way. He was fully fallen now, a dark sider who needed to find his own path forward. Nad fled from the Jedi Order, stealing a ship and disappearing into uncharted space. He was guided by something he didn't fully understand. Visions, whispers in his dreams, a pull toward a destination he couldn't name. The dark side was calling to him, and he followed that call to the jungle moon of Yavin 4. There, among ancient temples overgrown with vegetation, Freedon Nad discovered the spirit of Nagasado. The ancient Dark Lord had been waiting centuries for a suitable apprentice, someone with both power and ambition, who could learn his secrets and potentially continue his work. Nad fit perfectly. Sado's ghost taught Nad everything he knew about Sith sorcery, alchemy, and philosophy. Nad learned techniques that the Jedi would never teach, powers that drew directly from passion, anger, and desire. He discovered how to manipulate life itself through alchemy, how to bend others to his will through Sith mind tricks, how to extend his existence beyond natural limits. The training was intense, measured in years rather than months, and it transformed Nad into something far more dangerous than a merely fallen Jedi. But Sado's knowledge, while valuable, represented only one stream of Sith tradition. Nad craved more. Guided by Sado's teachings, he traveled to Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld. 4 centuries after the Republic assault, the planet remained a wasteland, but the tombs of the Dark Lords still stood, and within those tombs lingered dangerous knowledge. Nad ventured into the Valley of the Dark Lords, where the greatest Sith rulers of the First Empire had been entombed. He faced trials left behind by ancient Sith spirits, tests of strength, will, and commitment to the dark side. Nad survived where others might have been destroyed, proving himself worthy in the eyes of these long-dead masters. They granted him access to their holocrons, Sith artifacts that contained the accumulated wisdom of millennia. Armed with knowledge from both Nagasado and the ancient Sith lords of Korriban, Freedon Nad was now one of the most dangerous Darksiders in the galaxy. He had the power, the knowledge, and the ambition to carve out his own empire. All he needed was a kingdom to rule. He found it on Onderon, a world in the Inner Rim known for its unique culture. Onderon was split between the walled city of Iziz and the wilderness beyond, where beast riders lived in harmony with the dangerous creatures that prowled to the forests. The planet had recently unified under Queen Aminoa, ending centuries of conflict between the city dwellers and the beast riders. Nad arrived on Onderon as a teacher and advisor, presenting himself as a wise philosopher rather than revealing his dark side nature. Queen Aminoa, hungry for power and eager to cement her dynasty's rule, welcomed his counsel. Nad became a trusted advisor, whispering in the queen's ear, slowly corrupting her and her lineage with Sith teachings. Over time, Nad essentially took control of Onderon's government, while remaining in the shadows. He taught Aminoa and her descendants Sith techniques, binding them to the dark side and ensuring their dependence on his knowledge. The royal family became Darksiders, using their powers to maintain an iron grip on the planet. Nad had achieved what Nagasado had failed to do. He had conquered a world and established a Sith presence in Republic space, without the Republic or Jedi even realizing what had happened. Nad eventually died, as all mortals must, but he had learned Sith techniques for binding one's spirit after death. His ghost remained on Onderon, continuing to influence the royal family and spreading dark side corruption like a disease through the planet's culture. His tomb became a site of terrible power, drawing other Darksiders to Onderon and ensuring that his legacy would endure. The consequences of Freedon Nad's success would ripple outward for centuries. He proved that the Sith way could survive even without the old empire, that individual Darksiders could achieve power and influence by more subtle means than open conquest. He established a playbook that future Sith would follow. Find a world or organization vulnerable to corruption, offer power to those in leadership, and control from the shadows, while maintaining the appearance of legitimate government. And most importantly, Nad's tomb on Onderon became a reservoir of dark side knowledge that would inspire and corrupt future generations. When his tomb was eventually opened years later, the artifacts and teachings within would help trigger one of the most devastating wars the galaxy had yet seen, the Great Sith War, led by two fallen Jedi who would make Nagasado's invasion look almost restrained by comparison. But before that conflict could erupt, before Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma would tear the galaxy apart, the dark seeds Freedon Nad had planted needed time to germinate and grow. Time for the right souls to be born, raised, trained as Jedi, and then corrupted by the lure of forbidden power. Exar Kun's fall and the Great Sith War, approximately 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, nearly 1,000 years after the collapse of the First Sith Empire. The Jedi Order faced its greatest challenge since the 100-Year Darkness. This crisis wouldn't come from an invading Sith fleet or an ancient enemy rising from hiding. It would come from within, from two Jedi who would fall so far into darkness that they would nearly destroy both the Order and the Republic. The first was a Jedi named Exar Kun, born on one of the core worlds with a connection to the Force, so strong that his potential seemed limitless. From his earliest days of training, Kun demonstrated abilities that surpassed most of his peers. He was intelligent, charismatic, and driven by an insatiable hunger for knowledge. These traits made him an exceptional student in many ways, but they also contained the seeds of his downfall. Kun's master was Vodosyosk Bas, a Kravaki Jedi whose wisdom and patience were legendary. Bas recognized Kun's potential but also sensed the dangerous pride that lurked beneath his student's accomplishments. He tried to teach Kun humility, to help him understand that power without wisdom was dangerous, that the path of the Jedi required more than just raw strength in the Force. But Kun's impatience grew with each passing year. He wanted to learn faster, to access knowledge that Bas kept hidden, to push beyond the boundaries of what Jedi training typically allowed. When Bas warned him about the dangers of the dark side, Kun began to resent what he saw as his master's timidity. He started to believe that the Jedi Council was deliberately holding him back, afraid of what he might become if given full access to the Force's potential. The breaking point came when Kun learned about ancient Sith teachings. Rather than reject this forbidden knowledge as dangerous, he became obsessed with studying it. He convinced himself that understanding the dark side didn't mean succumbing to it, that he was strong enough to learn Sith secrets without being corrupted. It was the same rationalization that had led countless Jedi to fall before him, but Kun believed he was different, special, destined for something greater than ordinary Jedi. Against his master's wishes, Kun left the Order and traveled to Onderon, drawn by rumors of ancient Sith knowledge. There, he encountered the spirit of Freedon Nad, who recognized immediately what Kun was, a powerful, prideful Jedi ripe for corruption. Nad began to teach Kun, feeding his ego, encouraging his worst impulses, presenting the dark side as a natural extension of his abilities, rather than a corruption of them. Nad urged Kun to travel to Korriban, promising even greater power. Kun, now convinced he was on a quest for understanding rather than falling into darkness, made the journey to the ancient Sith homeworld. In the tombs of the Dark Lords, he faced trials designed by long-dead Sith to test initiates. These weren't neutral tests of strength. They were specifically designed to push Force users toward the dark side, to make them embrace anger, fear, and hatred as sources of power. During these trials, Kun was nearly killed when an ancient temple collapsed on him. His bones were shattered in over 100 places. As he lay dying in the darkness, believing this was the end, the spirit of Freedon Nad appeared and offered him a choice: die as a failed Jedi, or embrace the dark side and live as something more powerful. Kun chose power. The dark side flowed through him, healing his broken body in ways that should have been impossible. He emerged from the tomb transformed, no longer a Jedi seeking forbidden knowledge, but a true dark sider who had consciously chosen the Sith path. Kun traveled next to Yavin 4, to the very temples where Naga Sadow had once hidden. There, he encountered the Masasi, descendants of the warriors Sadow had brought to the moon, transformed by centuries of isolation and Sith alchemy into something barely recognizable as the species they once were. Kun used his newfound powers to dominate them, making them his servants and beginning to reshape the temples for his own purposes. Following ancient Sith tradition, Kun began searching for others touched by the dark side who might serve him or challenge him. He sensed the presence of Sith practitioners in the Empress Teta system, a cluster of 7 worlds that had recently been unified under Empress Teta. What he found there would change everything. The Empress Teta system had been corrupted by a dark side cult called the Krath. Founded by 2 aristocratic siblings, Satal and Alima Keto, the Krath had discovered Sith artifacts from Freedon Nad's tomb and used that knowledge to launch a bloody coup. They murdered their own parents, seized control of the system, and began a campaign of conquest, styling themselves as new Sith Lords despite having no true connection to the ancient order. But there was someone else in the Empress Teta system who did have authentic power in the dark side, a fallen Jedi named Ulic Qel-Droma. Ulic's story paralleled Kun's in tragic ways. He had been a respected Jedi Knight, committed to protecting the innocent and upholding the Order's ideals. When the Krath launched their revolution, killing thousands of innocents and threatening to spread their dark side corruption beyond the Empress Theta system, Ulic proposed a bold plan. He would infiltrate the Krath, pretending to join them, and destroy them from within. The Jedi Council warned against this plan. They recognized the danger of deliberately exposing oneself to dark side corruption, even with noble intentions. But Ulic was confident in his ability to resist temptation. He believed his commitment to the light was strong enough to withstand any test. He was wrong. Ulic infiltrated the Krath and quickly rose through their ranks, through a combination of genuine ability and feigned dark side conversion. But the longer he spent immersed in their culture, the more the dark side called to him. The Krath used Sith poisons on him, substances that eroded his connection to the light. He began to genuinely feel the power that came from giving in to anger and passion. The mission that was supposed to take days stretched into weeks, then months, and with each passing day, Ulic fell deeper. By the time Exar Kun arrived in the Empress Theta system, Ulic had genuinely fallen to the dark side. He had become the lover of Alima Cato, and was leading the Krath as a true Darkseeder, no longer pretending for a mission he had long since forgotten. When Kun sensed Ulic's power, he saw both a potential ally and a potential rival. The two fallen Jedi met on the throne world of Sinagar, and immediately their pride demanded they fight to determine who was stronger. Their duel was fierce, lightsabers clashing in combat that shook the very foundations of the Iron Citadel, where they fought. Each was among the most powerful Force users of their generation. Each was a master of lightsaber combat, and neither could gain a decisive advantage. Then something extraordinary happened. The Sith amulets that both wore, Kun's taken from Korriban, Ulic's acquired from the Catos, suddenly activated. They projected a vision, a shared psychic experience showing the two combatants the glory of the ancient Sith Empire, the power that could be theirs if they worked together, rather than destroying each other. The spirit of Marka Ragnos appeared before them, an echo of the great Dark Lord who had ruled the Sith's golden age. Ragnos proclaimed that neither Kun nor Ulic was strong enough to stand alone, but together they could restore the Sith to their former glory. He declared Exar Kun as the Dark Lord of the Sith, the Master, and Ulic Qel-Droma as his apprentice. A Sith tattoo was seared onto Ulic's forehead by dark side energy, marking his new status. The two fallen Jedi accepted this destiny. Kun and Ulic formed an alliance that would become known as the Brotherhood of the Sith, combining Kun's mastery of Sith sorcery with Ulic's tactical brilliance and the military resources of the Krath cult. But they needed more than just the 7 worlds of Empress Theta to challenge the Republic. They needed armies. Ulic took on the task of securing military might. He traveled to the world of Quar, where he challenged Mandalore, the leader of the Mandalorian warrior clans. In single combat, Ulic defeated Mandalore and earned the Mandalorians' loyalty, bringing thousands of fierce warriors into the Brotherhood's ranks. Meanwhile, Exar Kun devised a plan to strike at the Jedi Order itself from within. He reached out through the Force to Jedi apprentices across the galaxy, particularly those who felt frustrated with their training or who harbored resentment toward their masters. Kun spoke to them through visions and dreams, promising power and freedom from the Jedi Code's restrictions. He seduced dozens of young Jedi to the dark side, convincing them that their masters were holding them back. Then, Kun issued a terrible command. On a coordinated signal, all his converts should strike down their Jedi masters simultaneously. It was a betrayal of unprecedented scale, exploiting the trust that existed between master and apprentice, to murder Jedi teachers across the galaxy. Many apprentices succeeded, killing their unsuspecting masters before the victims even realized they were under attack. The Jedi Order was devastated, losing a significant portion of its most experienced members in a single night. The Brotherhood of the Sith launched a full-scale war against the Republic. They had numbers now: the Krath forces, the Mandalorian warriors, and the fallen Jedi who had killed their masters. They had knowledge of Sith sorcery that gave them advantages in battle, and they had Exar Kun's creation, the double-bladed lightsaber, a weapon of ancient Sith design that increased a duelist's lethality significantly. The conflict became known as the Great Sith War, and it devastated the galaxy. Battle after battle saw the Brotherhood of the Sith defeat Republic forces. Kun and Ulic were tactical geniuses, coordinating their campaigns with precision. The Republic military, already weakened from previous conflicts, struggled to mount an effective defense. Ulic led an assault on Coruscant itself, attempting to capture the galactic capital. He nearly succeeded, fighting his way into the Republic's military command center. But the Jedi intervened at the critical moment, led by Ulic's former friends and family. They captured him and brought him before the Galactic Senate to stand trial for his crimes against the Republic. The trial of Ulic Qel-Droma should have been straightforward: a fallen Jedi judged and sentenced for his betrayals. But Exar Kun had no intention of allowing his apprentice to face justice. He arrived at the Senate chambers with Mandalore and a squad of Massassi warriors, storming the trial. Using Sith sorcery, Kun mentally froze the entire Senate assembly, leaving them conscious but unable to move or speak. He freed Ulic from his restraints and made his way to the Chancellor's podium. There, using the Force to control the Chancellor like a puppet, he forced the head of the Republic to proclaim the Sith's superiority and the futility of resistance. Then, before the helpless senators and captured Jedi, Exar Kun murdered the Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. But he wasn't finished. As he prepared to leave, one figure remained unfrozen: Kun's former master, Vodosiusk Bas, who had been watching the trial. Master Bas tried one final time to reach his former student, to remind him of what he once was and what he could return to being. But Kun was too far gone. He ignited his double-bladed lightsaber and faced his former teacher. The duel was brief. Bas fought valiantly, using his force-imbued staff against Kun's exotic weapon, but he was outmatched by his fallen apprentice's power. Kun struck him down, killing the master, who had tried so hard to save him. The death of Vodosiusk Bas in the Senate chambers crystallized for everyone watching just how far Exar Kun had fallen. This wasn't a wayward student who might be redeemed. This was a true Sith Lord who had murdered one of the most respected Jedi Masters in cold blood. The Brotherhood of the Sith continued their campaign, but their very success would soon become their undoing. Kun ordered an assault on the Jedi stronghold of Ossus, a library world where the Order had preserved thousands of years of knowledge and artifacts. His goal was to loot the great Jedi library, to steal holocrons and ancient texts that could increase his power even further. But this attack would set off a chain of events that led to the Brotherhood's collapse. Alima Keto, leading part of the assault, used a Sith artifact to trigger a supernova in the nearby Kron cluster, a weapon that would send a deadly shockwave toward Ossus, forcing the Jedi to evacuate and giving the Sith time to plunder the libraries. The plan worked better than anyone anticipated. The supernovae were triggered successfully, but the shockwave was so massive that it killed Alima herself and devastated Ossus, destroying much of what both Jedi and Sith had hoped to preserve. During the chaos on Ossus, something happened that shattered Ulic Qel-Droma's dark side conviction. His brother Kay confronted him among the burning ruins of the Jedi library. Kay refused to give up on Ulic, refused to accept that his brother was truly lost. They fought, lightsabers clashing as Ossus burned around them. and in a moment of pure dark side fury, Ulic killed his own brother. As Kay died in Ulic's arms, the shock of fratricide broke through the dark side fog that had clouded Ulic's mind. He suddenly saw with horrible clarity what he had become, what he had done. His grief and horror were so profound that they created an opening for Nomi Sunrider, a Jedi Master who had loved Ulic, to do something unprecedented. Through the Force, Nomi severed Ulic's connection to the Force entirely. It was a technique few Jedi even knew existed, a way to cut someone off from the energy field that binds all life together. For a Force-sensitive being, especially one as powerful as Ulic had been, this was a fate worse than death. Suddenly he was blind and deaf to the Force, cut off from the power that had defined his entire existence. The experience shattered Ulic completely. All his dark side conviction, all his ambition and pride collapsed in an instant. He surrendered to the Jedi, broken and grief-stricken, and in an act of redemption, he revealed the location of Exar Kun's base on Yavin 4. The Jedi Order assembled the largest force they had ever gathered. Thousands of Jedi Knights, supported by the full might of the Republic military, descended on Yavin 4 to end Exar Kun's threat, once and for all. Kun, sensing the approaching army, and knowing he couldn't win through conventional combat, attempted a desperate gambit. Using Sith sorcery on an unprecedented scale, Kun performed a ritual that drained the life force from every single Massassi warrior on the moon, thousands of beings whose lives he extinguished in moments. He used their stolen life energy to separate his spirit from his body, attempting to achieve a form of immortality by binding his consciousness to the temples themselves. The ritual partially succeeded. Kun's body died, but his spirit remained, trapped in the temple on Yavin 4. He had achieved a kind of immortality, but it was a prison as much as a preservation. He would remain there for thousands of years, his consciousness slowly fading, unable to affect the physical world, but also unable to move on or find peace. The Great Sith War ended with the Brotherhood defeated. Mandalore the Indomitable, leading Mandalorian forces on another front, was killed when his forces were routed. The Krath cult collapsed without Kun and Ulic's leadership. The fallen Jedi who had murdered their masters were hunted down or returned to the Order in shame. The cost had been staggering. The Jedi Order had lost a significant portion of its membership, including some of its greatest masters. Ossus, the repository of Jedi knowledge, was devastated, with countless irreplaceable texts and artifacts destroyed. Entire star systems had been ravaged by the war. The Republic itself was weakened, its military depleted, its civilian population traumatized by the conflict. And perhaps most troubling, the war had proven that the dark side remained a constant threat, that even promising Jedi could fall if given the right circumstances and temptations. The Order would need decades to recover, to rebuild their numbers and their confidence. But they didn't have decades. Within years, a new threat would emerge that would make the Great Sith War look like preparation for something even worse. The Mandalorian Wars begin. 20 years after the Great Sith War ended, the galaxy was still recovering. The Jedi Order had rebuilt much of its strength, but remained cautious, wary of another internal betrayal. The Republic was expanding again, incorporating new worlds and trying to heal the divisions created by the conflict. An uneasy peace settled over known space. Then, beyond the Republic's borders, Mandalore the Ultimate came to power. The Mandalorians were a warrior culture whose history stretched back millennia. They weren't a single species, but a people united by a shared creed and way of life. Anyone could become Mandalorian if they followed the Resul Nare, the 6 actions that defined Mandalorian identity. But at their core, the Mandalorians revered martial skill, personal honor, and the right to test themselves in combat. After their defeat in the Great Sith War and and the death of Mandalore the Indomitable, the clans had scattered, leaderless and diminished. A warrior arose to claim the mask of Mandalore, the symbol of leadership, and he took the title the Ultimate, indicating his ambition to be remembered as the greatest Mandalore in history. Mandalore the Ultimate began rebuilding the Mandalorian forces, but he didn't just want to restore what had been lost. He wanted to transform the Mandalorians into a unified military force capable of conquering the galaxy itself. He pioneered the Neo-Crusader movement, standardizing armor and tactics, establishing a strict military hierarchy, and instilling in his warriors a religious fervor about their crusade. The Mandalorians began raiding worlds in the Outer Rim around 3076 BBY. At first, these seemed like typical pirate attacks, criminal enterprises rather than organized military action. The Republic largely ignored them, assuming local security forces could handle raiders. The Jedi Council, still recovering from the Great Sith War and wary of another military intervention that might lead to more Jedi falling to the dark side, counseled patience and observation. But the Mandalorian attacks weren't random raids. Mandalore the Ultimate was systematically testing Republic defenses, measuring response times, identifying weaknesses. Each victory made his forces stronger and more confident. More warriors flocked to join the Neo-Crusaders, drawn by the promise of glory and conquest. The true horror of the Mandalorian campaign became clear when they attacked Cathar, homeworld of the Cathar species. The Mandalorians didn't just conquer the world, they committed genocide, slaughtering millions of Cathar civilians in what became known as the Battle of Cathar. The few survivors were enslaved or hunted for sport. It was a deliberate act of terror, meant to send a message. The Mandalorians took no prisoners and showed no mercy. Even this atrocity didn't immediately galvanize the Republic or the Jedi Council to action. The Council argued that the Mandalorians were still testing them, that the true threat hadn't yet revealed itself. They feared that if the Jedi entered the war prematurely, they might be walking into a trap. Better to wait, to watch, to prepare for the real enemy when it finally showed itself. But not all Jedi agreed with the Council's caution. Across the Order, younger Jedi Knights grew increasingly frustrated with what they saw as the Council's passivity. Worlds were burning, civilians were dying, the Mandalorians were growing bolder with each conquest, and the Jedi, who had always been defenders of the innocent, were ordered to wait and watch. One Jedi Knight, in particular, refused to accept the Council's decision, a young, charismatic warrior whose name would echo through galactic history, Revan. Revan had been a brilliant student, demonstrating exceptional skill in both lightsaber combat and force techniques. But more than raw power, Revan possessed something that would define his legacy, an almost supernatural tactical genius and an ability to inspire others to follow him. When Revan spoke about the need to defend the innocent, about the Jedi's duty to act rather than wait, others listened. He wasn't alone in his convictions. His closest friend, a Jedi named Alec, stood with him from the beginning. Alec would later take the name Malak, but in these early days, he was simply Revan's most loyal companion, the warrior at his side as they challenged the Council's authority. Revan began speaking with other Jedi, particularly younger knights who shared his frustration. He argued that the Jedi Code demanded they help those in need, that waiting for some hypothetical greater threat, while real people suffered, was a betrayal of everything the Order claimed to stand for. His arguments were passionate and persuasive, appealing to the idealism that had drawn these Jedi to the Order in the first place. The movement that formed around Revan became known as the Revanchists, taking their name from their leader. It started small, a few dozen Jedi who agreed with Revan's position. But as news of more Mandalorian atrocities reached Coruscant, as the list of conquered worlds grew longer, more Jedi joined the cause. Eventually, hundreds of Jedi Knights, many of the Order's youngest and brightest declared their intention to defy the Council and join the war. The Jedi Council found itself in an impossible position. If they continued to forbid intervention, they would lose a significant portion of their order to rebellion. But if they sanctioned the war effort, they would be endorsing exactly the kind of military engagement that had led to Jedi falling to the dark side in the past. They feared another Exar Kun or Ulic Qel-Droma might emerge from the crucible of war. Revan proposed a compromise that the Council reluctantly accepted. The Jedi who wished to fight would be formed into a Mercy Corps, officially serving as healers and support staff for Republic military forces. This allowed the Council to maintain the fiction that they weren't sending Jedi into combat, while giving the revanchists the opportunity they wanted. In reality, of course, the revanchists were warriors, not medics. Revan and Malak were commissioned as generals in the Republic military, given command over both the Jedi who had joined them and significant Republic forces. They immediately began active combat operations against the Mandalorians. The Mandalorians had expected the Jedi to fight like the Force-using mystics they'd faced in the Great Sith War, powerful individuals who could turn the tide of specific battles, but who didn't think strategically on a galactic scale. What they got instead was Revan, who proved to be not just a powerful Force user, but a military genius, whose tactics and strategies consistently outmaneuvered Mandalore's commanders. Revan understood that winning this war required more than just winning battles. He began studying Mandalorian culture, learning their tactics, anticipating their strategies. He won several early victories that boosted Republic morale and proved that the Mandalorians could be beaten. Worlds that had been on the verge of surrendering to the Mandalorians found new hope as the revanchists pushed back the invasion. But as the war dragged on, something began to change in Revan. The idealistic young Jedi who had defied the Council to protect the innocent started making compromises that would have horrified his younger self. He began to accept that sometimes sacrifice was necessary, that not every world could be saved, that strategic withdrawals and even tactical losses could serve a greater purpose. Revan started using Mandalorian tactics against them. Ruthless, efficient, willing to accept civilian casualties if it meant achieving military objectives. He began to prioritize victory over individual lives, calculating acceptable losses with cold mathematical precision. His closest followers noticed the change, but said nothing, trusting that Revan knew what he was doing, that these dark choices were necessary evils in service of ultimately saving the galaxy. The war consumed nearly a decade, with both sides winning and losing battles in a grinding conflict that devastated world after world. The Mandalorians proved to be resourceful and adaptable, learning from each defeat and pressing their advantages wherever they found them. But slowly, inexorably, Revan's tactical brilliance began to tell. The conflict finally came to a head at a planet that would become legendary for all the wrong reasons. Malachor V, Revan, and Malak's campaign. Malachor V was a world already touched by the dark side, a planet where ancient Sith had once practiced their arts and left lingering corruption. Revan had discovered this world during his campaign against the Mandalorians and recognized both its strategic value and its danger. He ordered a Sith academy built there in secret, studying the ancient techniques and knowledge left behind, all while publicly continuing his role as the Republic's defender. This was part of a pattern that had been developing throughout the war. Revan had begun exploring Sith teachings, initially claiming it was to understand the enemy better, to learn what had motivated the Mandalorian crusade. But the more he delved into dark side knowledge, the more it changed him. He was seeking power that could end the war decisively, but in doing so, he was walking the same path that had destroyed Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma. Malak, ever loyal to his friend, followed Revan down this path. Where Revan went, Malak followed. Where Revan justified questionable actions, Malak found ways to rationalize them. The two of them had become so focused on winning the war that they had stopped questioning whether their methods were corrupting them. Revan devised a plan to end the Mandalorian threat, once and for all. He would lure Mandalore the Ultimate and the bulk of the Mandalorian forces to Malachor V for a decisive battle. There, he would spring a trap that would eliminate the Mandalorian military leadership and crush their army in a single stroke. The trap was a weapon, the Mass Shadow Generator. It was a super weapon developed in secret, capable of manipulating gravity on a planetary scale. When activated, it would create a gravity well so intense that it would tear apart ships in orbit and potentially devastate the planet's surface. It was a weapon of mass destruction, the kind of indiscriminate killer that no Jedi should have been willing to use. Revan gave command of the Mass Shadow Generator to one of his most trusted generals, a Jedi named Matra Surik, who had followed him into the war. When the moment came, when Mandalorian forces were fully committed to the battle over Malachor V, Revan gave the order. Surik activated the weapon. The Mass Shadow Generator worked beyond even Revan's expectations. The artificial gravity well didn't just pull ships out of orbit, it tore them apart, ripping hulls to shreds and crushing crew members under impossible forces. Thousands of Mandalorian ships were destroyed in moments. But the weapon didn't discriminate. Republic vessels caught in the field suffered the same fate. Soldiers who had fought under Revan's command, Jedi who had followed him from the beginning, died alongside the Mandalorians they were fighting. The planet itself began to break apart, massive chunks of its surface torn free by the gravitational distortions. Malachor V became a shattered wasteland, a wound in the Force itself where so many had died in such concentrated agony that the echoes would linger for millennia. Mandalore the Ultimate was among the dead. In the chaos, Revan engaged the Mandalorian leader in single combat and defeated him, claiming the Mask of Mandalore as a trophy. With their leader dead and their forces scattered, the Mandalorian crusade collapsed. The survivors fled, leaderless and broken, many abandoning their warrior culture entirely to become bounty hunters or mercenaries. The Mandalorian wars were over. The Republic had won, but the cost would prove far higher than anyone realized at the time. Revan ordered the Mandalorian warriors to disarm completely, scattering them across the galaxy to prevent them from ever reforming into a unified military threat. He kept the Mask of Mandalore, ensuring that no new Mandalore could rise to unite the clans. To the Republic, he was a hero who had saved them from conquest. But to those who had fought alongside him, who had witnessed the cold calculations and terrible compromises he had made, Revan was something else, something darker. The Jedi Council demanded that Revan, Malak, and Mitra Surik return to Coruscant to answer for their actions during the war. Surik, devastated by what she had done at Malachor V, and feeling her connection to the Force twist and break, agreed to face judgment. But Revan and Malak refused. Instead, they took their remaining forces, Jedi and Republic soldiers, who were more loyal to Revan personally than to any institution, and headed into the unknown regions. Officially, they claimed to be pursuing the remnants of the Mandalorian forces. In truth, Revan was following a trail he had discovered during the war, evidence that something had been manipulating the Mandalorians, pushing them to invade the Republic. What Revan and Malak found in the unknown regions was both an answer and a trap. They discovered the hidden Sith Empire on Dromund Kaas, the civilization that the Sith Emperor had been building in secret for over 1,000 years. And they discovered that the immortal Emperor himself had been the hidden hand behind the Mandalorian crusade, using it to test the Republic's defenses and weaken the Jedi Order. The Emperor had been waiting for powerful Force users to find him, and in Revan and Malak, he found perfect subjects. Both were already walking the edge between light and dark. Both had embraced questionable methods in the name of the greater good. Both possessed enormous power and tactical brilliance. The Emperor reached out through the Force and dominated their minds, breaking their will and turning them into his servants, or so he believed. The truth was more complex. The Emperor did corrupt Revan and Malak, completing their fall to the dark side that the Mandalorian Wars had begun. He gave them Sith names, Darth Revan and Darth Malak, marking them as true Sith Lords. He commanded them to find and claim the Star Forge, an ancient Rakatan weapon of terrible power, and use it to soften the Republic for his own eventual invasion. But while the Emperor thought he had completely dominated them, Revan retained some measure of will, some core of identity that remained his own. Rather than simply obeying the Emperor's commands, Revan broke free from the mental domination and established his own agenda. He would indeed conquer the Republic, but not to deliver it to the Emperor. He would reshape it into a strong, unified empire capable of standing against the Sith Emperor when the ancient tyrant finally launched his invasion. With Malak as his apprentice, Darth Revan returned to known space as a conqueror, beginning what would be called the Jedi Civil War. The galaxy, barely recovered from the Mandalorian Wars, found itself facing an even more terrible threat. The hero who had saved them had returned as their enemy, leading an army of Sith against the Republic he had once defended. And in the unknown regions, the immortal Sith Emperor watched and waited, patient as stone, knowing that whether Revan succeeded or failed, the Republic and the Jedi Order would be weakened when the time came for his own invasion. The old Republic era continues to spiral downward into darkness. Every victory against the dark side seems only to plant seeds for worse conflicts to come. The cycle continues, repeating with variations, each iteration teaching new lessons that will eventually echo all the way to the time of the Skywalkers, thousands of years in the future. Breathe deeply now. Let your mind rest. There is more to tell, but for now, simply drift in the knowledge of these ancient conflicts. In our next chapter, we'll explore the Jedi Civil War, the ultimate fate of Revan and Malak, and the rise of new threats that would push the galaxy to the edge of complete darkness. Sleep well, knowing that even in the darkest times, there are always those who fight for the light. Welcome to the final chapter of our journey through the Old Republic era. Let the weight of history settle over you like a comfortable blanket as we explore the last great conflicts of this ancient age. The story we've been following of fallen Jedi, dark empires, and cycles of war now approaches its climax. Close your eyes and drift as we discover how the galaxy finally began to learn from its mistakes, and how the stage was set for everything that would follow. The Jedi Civil War. When Darth Revan returned from the unknown regions, he brought with him an armada unlike anything the galaxy had seen since Naga Sado's invasion 3,000 years earlier. The Star Forge, the ancient Rakatan superweapon he had discovered, gave him the ability to produce warships at a terrifying rate. This ancient space station fed on the dark side, channeling Force energy to create matter from nothing, a violation of known physics that demonstrated just how powerful the old Rakatans had been at their peak. But the Star Forge was more than just a factory. It was also a corrupting influence, feeding on the dark side emotions of whoever controlled it, while simultaneously amplifying those emotions. The more Revan used the Star Forge, the deeper he sank into the dark side, and the more the station's production accelerated. It was a feedback loop of darkness that threatened to consume him entirely. Revan's strategy for conquering the Republic was methodical and calculated. Unlike Sado's chaotic invasion or even the Mandalorian Crusade, Revan fought with surgical precision. He avoided destroying key infrastructure whenever possible, targeting military installations while generally sparing civilian populations. Worlds that surrendered were incorporated into his growing Sith Empire with minimal bloodshed. Those that resisted faced overwhelming force until they had no choice but to capitulate. This approach was deliberate. Revan hadn't forgotten his original purpose, even in his fallen state. He was building an empire strong enough to face the Sith Emperor, not simply conquering for the sake of power. He needed infrastructure intact, populations alive to support his war machine, and resources preserved rather than destroyed. It was conquest with long-term planning, which made it all the more effective and terrifying. Many of the Jedi who had followed Revan into the Mandalorian Wars now followed him into darkness. They had become so accustomed to taking orders from him, so convinced of his tactical genius, that they continued to serve even after he declared himself a Sith Lord. These fallen Jedi formed the core of Revan's officer corps, bringing their Force abilities and combat training to his cause. The Jedi Civil War wasn't just Republic against Sith, it was Jedi against Jedi, former friends and comrades now on opposite sides of a conflict that tore the Order apart. Malak served as Revan's apprentice and enforcer, commanding fleets and leading assaults on key worlds. But while Revan maintained his strategic thinking and long-term planning, Malak had fully embraced the dark side's most destructive impulses. Where Revan would accept surrender and preserve infrastructure, Malak advocated for total destruction, for making examples of worlds that resisted. Their philosophical differences about how to wage the war created tension that would eventually erupt into betrayal. The Republic struggled to mount an effective defense. Their forces were still depleted from the Mandalorian Wars. The Jedi Order was fractured, having lost many of its best warriors, either to death in previous conflicts or to Revan's banner. And Revan's tactical brilliance meant that the few victories the Republic did achieve came at tremendous cost. The tide began to turn when a young Jedi named Bastila Shan entered the conflict. Bastila possessed a rare Force ability called Battle Meditation, the same power that Naga Sadow had used millennia earlier. With Battle Meditation, she could influence the outcome of conflicts across vast distances, bolstering her allies' courage and tactical thinking, while simultaneously sapping the will and coordination of her enemies. It was one of the most powerful war-related Force abilities known, and Bastila's particular gift with it was exceptional even by the standards of other battle meditation practitioners. With Bastila's battle meditation supporting them, Republic forces finally began winning significant victories against Revan's fleets. The tide of the war stabilized, though it remained far from certain whether the Republic could achieve ultimate victory. Revan's forces were too numerous, his tactics too clever, and the Star Forge's production too overwhelming. The Jedi Council made a desperate decision. Rather than continue the slow grind of conventional warfare, they would attempt to capture Darth Revan himself. If they could remove him from command, his empire might collapse into internal conflict, as Sith organizations historically did when their leader was removed. It was a bold plan, requiring Jedi strike teams to board Revan's flagship while it was engaged in battle, an almost suicidal mission. Bastila Shan led the strike team. Using her battle meditation to give them an advantage, she and her Jedi companions fought their way through Revan's ship, cutting down Sith warriors and Dark Jedi until they reached the bridge where the Dark Lord commanded his forces. The confrontation that followed would have determined the entire war's outcome, but it never happened. Darth Malak, commanding a fleet in support of his master's flagship, saw an opportunity he had been waiting for. Malak had grown to resent Revan's authority, believing himself strong enough to rule in his own right. More fundamentally, Malak had embraced the Sith philosophy of the apprentice, eventually overthrowing the master. In the critical moment when the Jedi strike team was about to confront Revan, Malak ordered his ships to fire on Revan's flagship, targeting the bridge specifically. The betrayal was complete and devastating. Turbo laser fire tore through the ship's command section. Revan, caught completely off guard by his apprentice's treachery, was nearly killed. The bridge was destroyed, and Revan's broken body was thrown into space. Malak believed he had killed his master, and eliminated the Jedi strike team in one move. He immediately claimed leadership of the Sith Empire, declaring himself the new Dark Lord. But he was wrong about the Jedi. Bastila Shan had survived the attack, through a combination of skill, luck, and the Force. More incredibly, she had found Revan's dying body floating in the wreckage, and used the Force to preserve his life, however barely. Bastila brought Revan back to the Jedi Council on Dantooine, presenting them with an unconscious, dying Sith Lord who had once been their greatest hero. The Council faced an unprecedented ethical dilemma. They could execute Revan, ending the threat he posed permanently. They could try to imprison him, though keeping such a powerful Force user contained seemed unlikely. Or they could do something that had never been attempted on this scale before. The Council made a controversial decision that would haunt them and shape galactic history. They used the Force to wipe Revan's memories completely, erasing everything he knew about being Darth Revan, about leading armies, about the dark side. Then, they implanted new memories, creating a false identity for him. When Revan awakened, he would believe he was a Republic soldier who had been wounded in battle and rescued by the Jedi. The Council's reasoning was pragmatic, but troubling. Rather than simply destroying this powerful Force user or risking him escaping and returning to his Sith Empire, they would reprogram him and use him against his own forces. Revan's tactical knowledge and Force abilities would serve the Republic instead of threatening it. They would make him a weapon against Darth Malak. Revan awakened with no memory of his past. The Jedi trained him, observing as his natural abilities resurfaced. They paired him with Bastila Shan, whose Force bond to him from saving his life gave her a connection that helped keep him stable and loyal. Together with a crew of allies they gathered, Revan was sent on a mission to locate the Star Forge, using his own strategic thinking to trace his former self's movements and uncover the superweapon's location. During this quest, Revan discovered the truth about his identity in the worst possible way. Darth Malak captured him and Bastila, then revealed that Revan was not a simple Republic soldier, but the Dark Lord of the Sith himself, the Master Malak had betrayed. The revelation shattered everything Revan believed about himself. Malak tried to turn Revan back to the dark side, offering to restore his memories and return him to his rightful place as a Sith Lord. When that failed, Malak turned his attention to Bastila, using torture and dark side techniques to break her will and corrupt her. Bastila, already vulnerable due to her Force bond with Revan, fell to the dark side and became Malak's apprentice. Revan faced the ultimate crisis of identity. He had been a Jedi, then a Sith Lord, then a mind-wiped Republic soldier, and now he knew the truth about all of it. He could choose to reclaim his identity as Darth Revan, to return to the dark side and his place as a Sith Lord, or he could reject that past and commit fully to the light side, not because the Jedi Council had programmed him, but because it was his genuine choice. The decision point came at the Star Forge itself. Revan led Republic forces in an assault on the ancient station, fighting through Malak's defenses to reach the Dark Lord. There, he confronted Bastila, now fallen and serving Malak. Rather than killing her, Revan used their Force bond to reach through her dark side corruption, reminding her of who she had been, of the connection they shared, of the light that still existed within her. Through love and compassion, rather than force, he brought her back from the dark side. The final confrontation with Malak was inevitable. The former apprentice had grown tremendously in power since his betrayal, drawing on the Star Forge's dark side energies to enhance his abilities. But Malak had never possessed Revan's tactical genius or his fundamental understanding of the Force. Where Malak was powerful but crude, Revan was precise and strategic. Their duel raged across the Star Forge's command deck. Lightsabers clashed with thunderous force. Dark side lightning arced between them. Malak drew on chambers full of captured Jedi, draining their life force to replenish his strength whenever Revan seemed to gain an advantage. But Revan had learned something that Malak never understood. The dark side's power came with limitations, and true strength required more than just raw power. Revan destroyed the life support chambers, freeing the captured Jedi from Malak's grip. Then, in a prolonged duel that tested every skill both combatants possessed, Revan defeated his former friend and apprentice. As Malak lay dying, he expressed something like regret, wondering if things might have been different if he had stayed loyal, if they had remained friends rather than master and apprentice, bound by Sith philosophy. With Malak dead and the Star Forge under Republic control, the Jedi Civil War effectively ended. The Sith forces, losing coordination without their leader and facing certain defeat, scattered or surrendered. The Republic had won, though at tremendous cost. Entire fleets had been destroyed, populations displaced, infrastructure damaged across dozens of worlds. And Revan had to face an impossible situation. He had reclaimed his identity, but rejected the darkness that had consumed his former self. He had saved the galaxy, but through methods that involved mind control and manipulation by the Jedi Council. He was a hero, but one whose heroism came from overcoming a villainy he himself had created. Shortly after the war's end, Revan left known space again, returning to the unknown regions. He claimed he needed to address unfinished business, threats he remembered from his time as a Sith Lord. Those close to him suspected he was going after the true Sith Empire, the one led by the immortal Emperor. Revan departed, leaving Bastila behind with promises to return. He never did. What happened to Revan in the unknown regions would remain a mystery for centuries, though later generations would piece together fragments of the truth. The immortal Emperor had been waiting, and when Revan came to challenge him, the Emperor captured him and imprisoned him, using Revan's powerful connection to the Force for his own purposes. The Jedi Civil War marked the end of an era. The Republic had survived, barely, but it would take generations to fully recover. The Jedi Order was a shadow of its former strength, with barely more than 100 Jedi Knights surviving. And new threats were emerging, Darksiders who had studied the tactics of Revan and Malak, and sought to carve out their own empires from the chaos. The Sith Triumvirate. In the immediate aftermath of the Jedi Civil War, a group calling themselves the Sith Triumvirate emerged from the shadows to hunt the surviving Jedi to near extinction. These three Sith Lords, Darth Traya, Darth Nihilus, and Darth Sion, represented a new kind of threat, different from the Sith empires of old, or even the recent conflicts led by Revan and Malak. Darth Traya, also known as Kreia, was the heart and philosophical core of the Triumvirate. She had been a Jedi Master, one who had trained Revan before his fall. When Revan fell to the dark side, Traya felt responsible, believing she had somehow failed in his training. She began questioning everything the Jedi taught, wondering if their philosophy was fundamentally flawed. This questioning led her to study the Sith teachings as well, seeking to understand both sides of the Force. Eventually, Traya came to a radical conclusion. Both the Jedi and the Sith were slaves to the Force itself, puppets dancing on strings they couldn't see. She began to despise the Force as a manipulative entity that robbed beings of true free will. Her ultimate goal became nothing less than the death of the Force itself, to sever the galaxy's connection to this cosmic energy and allow people to finally live without its influence. Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, was something barely human anymore. Nihilus had been at Malachor 5 when the mass shadow generator activated. The planet's destruction and the deaths of thousands of Force users created a wound in the Force that somehow merged with Nihilus's being. He became a walking void, a hunger that could never be satisfied. Nihilus fed on Force energy itself, draining the life force from entire planets to sustain his twisted existence. Where he traveled, worlds died, their populations consumed to feed his bottomless need. Darth Sion, the Lord of Pain, had died multiple times, but refused to truly perish. He held himself together through sheer hatred and will, his body a mass of fractured bones and shattered flesh that should have been dead, but continued to function through dark side power. Pain was his constant companion, but he had learned to transform that agony into power, using it to fuel his abilities and make himself nearly impossible to kill. As long as his will remained unbroken, Sion would continue to rise, no matter how much damage he sustained. Together, these three represented different aspects of the dark side and different threats to the galaxy. Tria's philosophy, Nihilus's hunger, and Sion's refusal to die made them uniquely dangerous. They hunted the Jedi with systematic efficiency, seeking out survivors of the Civil War, and either killing them or converting them to serve their purpose. Their campaign nearly succeeded in making the Jedi extinct. The Order, already devastated by the Civil War, found itself hunted across the galaxy. Jedi Masters went into hiding, concealing their Force sensitivity to avoid detection. Temples and enclaves were abandoned, as the Triumvirate's agents tracked down any gathering of Force users. Within just a few years, the galaxy believed the Jedi Order had been completely destroyed. But one Jedi survived who would prove crucial to stopping the Triumvirate: Mitra Surik, the general who had activated the mass shadow generator at Malachor 5 under Revan's orders. The experience had severed her connection to the Force, or so it seemed. In truth, Surik had unconsciously cut herself off from the Force to survive the horror of what she had done, creating a wound similar to what had transformed Nihilus. Surik had answered the Jedi Council's summons after the Mandalorian Wars and accepted exile as punishment for her role in the atrocity at Malachor 5. For 10 years, she wandered the Outer Rim, a former Jedi stripped of her powers, trying to make sense of what had happened. When she finally returned to known space, she found a galaxy where the Jedi had been nearly exterminated. Through a series of encounters that pushed her to rediscover her connection to the Force, Surik began gathering surviving Jedi Masters and investigating what had happened to the Order. Her journey brought her into conflict with all three members of the Triumvirate, forcing her to confront not just external enemies, but also the consequences of her own actions years earlier. Darth Nihilus attempted to drain her, as he had drained entire planets, but Surik's unique nature as a wound in the Force meant she was immune to his technique. In fact, she became a threat to Nihilus because she represented an opposite force. Where he consumed, she could potentially absorb his own hunger and neutralize it. Their confrontation aboard Nihilus's flagship resulted in the Lord of Hunger's defeat, though whether he was truly destroyed or simply dissipated back into the dark side remained uncertain. Darth Sion fell not through violence, but through compassion. Surik convinced him that his continued existence was suffering without purpose, that holding himself together through hatred was a prison rather than strength. In accepting this truth and letting go of his will to survive, Sion finally allowed himself to die, finding the peace he had denied himself for so long. Darth Traya presented the most complex challenge. As Surik's former teacher, Traya understood her student in ways the other Sith Lords couldn't. Their final confrontation on Malachor Fulf, the site where so much tragedy had begun, became not just a physical battle, but a philosophical one. Traya argued that the Force was a manipulative entity that needed to be destroyed, that only by killing it could beings achieve true freedom. Surik rejected this philosophy. She had learned through her journey that strength came not from rejecting the Force or being enslaved by it, but from understanding her relationship with it and making her own choices. The Force wasn't a puppet master, but a tool that could be used for good or ill, depending on who wielded it. In defeating Traya, Surik proved that one could face the darkest truths about the Force without being destroyed or corrupted by them. With the Triumvirate destroyed, the immediate threat to the Jedi ended. But the Order remained nearly extinct, with only a handful of Masters and Knights surviving. Surik took on the task of seeking out Force-sensitive individuals who could be trained, beginning the slow process of rebuilding. Eventually, she too would leave known space, following the same path Revan had taken into the unknown regions, seeking to help him against whatever threat he faced there. Neither Revan nor Surik would return from that journey. The fate of both remained a mystery that later generations would uncover. But for now, the galaxy believed that its greatest heroes had simply vanished, leaving behind only their legends and the slow, painful work of recovery. The Great Galactic War. 3 centuries passed. The Republic recovered and expanded. The Jedi Order rebuilt itself, training new generations of Guardians. The conflicts of Revan's era faded from living memory into history, studied but not truly understood by those who hadn't lived through them. Peace, imperfect and fragile but real, settled over the galaxy. Then, in 3681 BBY, the Scythe Empire returned. The immortal Emperor Andromen Kas had been patient for over 1,000 years, building his strength in secret, preparing for the perfect moment to strike. He had learned from the failures of Nagasado's invasion. He wouldn't rely on illusions or make the mistake of underestimating Republic resolve. This time the Sith would be patient, methodical, and overwhelming. The Great Galactic War began with coordinated strikes on multiple fronts. Sith fleets emerged from the unknown regions, attacking Republic border worlds with precision and overwhelming force. The Republic military, grown complacent during centuries of peace, was caught completely off guard. World after world fell to Scythe conquest in the opening months of the conflict. The Jedi Order mobilized immediately, but they too had grown comfortable during the long peace. Many of their combat techniques had been forgotten or deprioritized in favor of meditation, diplomacy, and peacekeeping. The Sith warriors they faced were veterans of countless battles fought in the unknown regions, hardened by the Emperor's brutal training methods, and absolutely committed to their cause. Unlike previous Sith invasions, this wasn't a war of extermination or blind conquest. The Emperor's strategy was calculated. He conquered worlds, but left their populations alive, incorporating them into his empire, rather than destroying them. He targeted strategic locations and resources, building a sustainable empire rather than just a temporary military occupation. He was playing a long game, preparing for what he viewed as the galaxy's inevitable absorption into his dominion. The war dragged on for decades. Battles raged across the galaxy, with neither side able to achieve decisive victory. The Republic and Jedi adapted to fighting a Sith empire that was organized, disciplined, and led by strategic thinkers, rather than power-hungry individuals. The Sith, in turn, found that conquering was easier than holding territory, as occupied worlds repeatedly rebelled despite military defeat. Major worlds fell to Sith conquest. Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld, was reclaimed. The Emperor established it as a training center for new Sith acolytes, restoring the ancient academies and using them to indoctrinate captured Force-sensitive individuals. Other key systems fell one by one, each loss weakening the Republic's strategic position. The Jedi Order suffered tremendous losses. Thousands of Jedi Knights died in battles across the galaxy. Entire enclaves were destroyed when Sith forces overwhelmed their defenses. The Sith specifically targeted Jedi, recognizing them as the Republic's greatest advantage. Where possible, they captured Jedi rather than killing them, attempting to convert them to the dark side or using them in Sith alchemy experiments. Decades into the war, with the Sith controlling roughly half the galaxy, the Emperor grew impatient. His initial plan had called for the Republic to collapse within a few years, but they had proven more resilient than anticipated. The Emperor's Dark Council, the ruling body of Sith Lords directly below him, advised him that while victory was certain, it might take many more decades of grinding warfare to achieve. The Emperor ordered a change in strategy. Rather than continue the slow conquest, the Sith would offer peace negotiations, while secretly preparing for a devastating surprise attack that would cripple the Republic and force immediate surrender. The Dark Council contacted the Republic Senate with an unprecedented offer: peace talks to end the Great Galactic War. The Republic was desperate. Their military was exhausted, their resources depleted, their population tired of war. Even the Jedi Council, while suspicious of Sith motives, had to admit that they couldn't continue fighting indefinitely. Against their better judgment, they agreed to negotiations. Republic and Imperial diplomats convened on the peaceful world of Alderaan to discuss terms for a galaxy-wide ceasefire. For weeks, they debated and negotiated, slowly working toward what seemed like a possible peace agreement. Both sides made concessions. It appeared that after decades of bloodshed, the war might actually end through diplomacy. But it was all a deception. While the galaxy's attention focused on the negotiations on Alderaan, the Sith Empire assembled a massive fleet in secret. When the moment was right, when Republic forces were positioned to begin implementing the proposed ceasefire, the Sith struck at the heart of the Republic itself. Treaty of Coruscant and Cold War. The assault on Coruscant was one of the most devastating single battles in galactic history. The Sith fleet emerged from hyperspace, directly over the capital world, bypassing the defensive networks that should have detected their approach. The attack was coordinated with precision that suggested insider knowledge. Indeed, Sith spies had infiltrated Republic Command and provided detailed information about defensive positions and response protocols. The Sith bombarded Coruscant from orbit, targeting military installations and government centers, while mostly avoiding civilian areas. This wasn't about genocide, but about demonstrating overwhelming military superiority. As turbo laser fire rained down on the Senate District, Sith dropships descended carrying elite warriors and Dark Council members. The Jedi Temple was a primary target. Darth Malgus, one of the most powerful Sith Lords in the Empire, led the assault personally. His forces breached the Temple's defenses through a combination of overwhelming numbers and inside knowledge of its layout. The battle that followed was catastrophic. Jedi Masters and Knights fought desperately to defend their sacred headquarters, but they were vastly outnumbered and caught completely by surprise. Darth Malgus and his warriors carved through the Temple's defenders with brutal efficiency. He personally struck down multiple Jedi Masters, including Venzalo, a legendary warrior whose death symbolized just how complete the Sith victory was. The Temple's archives were looted, ancient artifacts stolen, and the building itself was left burning and devastated. Simultaneously, other Sith forces captured the Senate Tower, taking senators hostage and securing control of the Republic's government center. Within hours, the capital world of the galaxy was under Sith occupation. The entire planet was held hostage, with the Emperor's forces prepared to bombard civilian centers if the Republic didn't immediately surrender. Back on Alderaan, Republic diplomats received word of the attack with horror. They were trapped in an impossible position. If they rejected the Sith demands, Coruscant would be destroyed. If they accepted, they would be surrendering the Republic to their enemies under the worst possible terms. The Jedi representatives urged resistance, arguing that giving in to such treachery would only encourage future betrayals. But the Senate representatives knew they had no real choice. With Coruscant occupied, with the Sith fleet demonstrating clear military superiority, with their own forces scattered and unprepared for a coordinated counterattack, continued war would mean certain defeat. At least by accepting the Sith terms, they might preserve some measure of the Republic's existence. The Treaty of Coruscant was signed in 3653 BBY, officially ending the Great Galactic War. The terms were brutally unfavorable to the Republic. They were forced to withdraw their military forces from dozens of star systems, abandoning longtime allies to Sith conquest. Key trade routes were ceded to Imperial control. The Republic had to recognize the Sith Empire as a legitimate government with equal standing, and they had to accept Sith occupation of territories that represented nearly half of known space. The only concession the Republic gained was the promise that Sith forces would evacuate Coruscant itself, returning the capital to Republic control. But even this came with conditions. Sith protocol droids and observers would remain to monitor compliance with the treaty terms, and any violation would authorize immediate military action. The Jedi Order returned to Coruscant to find their temple in ruins. The building could be repaired, but the symbolic damage was immense. The Jedi had failed to protect the Republic's capital. They had been caught off guard and defeated in their own home. Public opinion turned against them, with many senators and civilians blaming the Jedi for the Republic's losses, rather than crediting them for preventing worse outcomes. The Treaty of Coruscant didn't bring peace so much as it formalized the Cold War. Both sides maintained massive military forces along their borders. Proxy conflicts erupted in neutral territories as Republic and Empire competed for influence. Intelligence agencies on both sides conducted espionage and sabotage operations. It was peace only in the technical sense that large-scale military campaigns had ceased. For the next decade, this uneasy status quo persisted. The Republic slowly rebuilt its strength, training new soldiers and developing new weapons. The Jedi Order adapted to their diminished status, accepting that they could no longer operate with the freedom they once enjoyed. And the Sith Empire consolidated its conquests, integrating new territories and preparing for the eventual resumption of open warfare. Both sides knew the peace couldn't last. The fundamental conflict between light and dark, between Republic ideals and Sith philosophy, remained unresolved. The Treaty of Coruscant had merely postponed the inevitable final confrontation, but within this seemingly hopeless situation, the groundwork was being laid for change. New heroes were emerging on both sides, individuals who would question the old ways and forge new paths. The Emperor's absolute control over the Sith Empire was beginning to show cracks, with some Sith Lords questioning whether his strategy of endless war truly served their interests. And within the Republic, voices were rising to argue that relying solely on military strength was insufficient, that they needed to address the fundamental weaknesses that had allowed the Sith to achieve such devastating success. The conflicts that would follow, the Galactic War, the rise and fall of various Sith factions, the ultimate confrontation with the immortal Emperor himself, would span centuries more. But the patterns established in these ancient conflicts would repeat over and over. The cycle of Jedi falling to darkness, of Sith empires rising and collapsing, of the Republic barely surviving existential threats, would continue all the way to the time of the Skywalkers. Conclusion and legacy. As we reach the end of our journey through the Old Republic era, it's worth reflecting on the patterns we've witnessed repeating across millennia. From the first Dark Jedi who discovered Korriban to the signing of the Treaty of Coruscant, we've seen the same themes emerge again and again. Jedi fall to the dark side not because they're weak, but because they're strong, powerful individuals who believe they can control forces beyond their understanding. Exar Kun, Ulic Qel-Droma, Revan, Malak, all of them started as promising Jedi who convinced themselves that studying the dark side wouldn't corrupt them, that they were special enough to resist its pull, and each time they were wrong. The Sith perpetually undermined themselves through their own philosophy. The rule that the apprentice must eventually overthrow the master creates a culture of constant betrayal and instability. Ludo Kresh challenged Nagasado. Malak betrayed Revan. This pattern would continue through the Old Republic era and beyond, only finally addressed when Darth Bane established the rule of two, but that's a story for another time. The Republic survives, repeatedly, not through superior military might, but through the resilience of its ideals and the diversity of its people. The Sith consistently underestimate this, believing that centralized power and ruthless efficiency will triumph over democratic chaos. They win battles and even wars, but they struggle to maintain long-term control because their philosophy is fundamentally corrosive to the kind of social cohesion necessary for stable civilization. And the Force itself seems to seek balance, though not in the simplistic way that term is often understood. When the dark side grows too strong, champions of light emerge to oppose it. When the Jedi grow complacent, new challenges arise to test them. The galaxy moves through cycles, each era learning from and building upon what came before. The Old Republic era matters not just as ancient history, but because it established patterns that would echo through all of Star Wars. When Anakin Skywalker fell to become Darth Vader, he followed a path worn by countless Jedi before him. When Emperor Palpatine built his empire, he learned from the successes and failures of Sith Lords across 3,000 years. When Luke Skywalker sought to rebuild the Jedi Order, he grappled with the same questions that had challenged the Order since the 100-year darkness. The conflicts we've explored, the Great Hyperspace War, the Great Sith War, the Mandalorian Wars, the Jedi Civil War, the Sith Triumvirate's Purge, and the Great Galactic War, weren't random events. They were connected, each creating the conditions for the next, each teaching lessons that would eventually accumulate into wisdom about how to actually break the cycle, rather than just surviving another iteration of it. The Old Republic era officially ended with the 7th Battle of Ruusan in 1000 BBY, when the Jedi finally destroyed the Brotherhood of Darkness, and the Sith went into hiding under Darth Bane's rule of two. But the shadows of this ancient age stretched forward across the millennium, influencing everything that followed. When you watch the Star Wars films or shows set during the Clone Wars or the Galactic Civil War, remember that those conflicts are echoes of battles fought thousands of years earlier. The stakes are the same, the fundamental conflict between light and dark unchanged, but the specific circumstances and individuals are new variations on timeless themes. The Old Republic era teaches us that history doesn't repeat exactly, but it does rhyme. That vigilance is necessary because the dark side never truly disappears. It waits patiently for new opportunities, that even the greatest heroes can fall if they lose sight of their principles. And that despite everything, despite countless wars and betrayals and near extinctions. The light endures because there are always those willing to fight for it. So rest now, knowing that you've traveled through thousands of years of galactic history. You've witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the corruption and redemption of heroes, the endless cycle of conflict between light and dark. Let this knowledge settle into your mind as you drift off to sleep, becoming part of your understanding of the galaxy far, far away. The Old Republic era is concluded, but its legacy continues. Every Jedi who ever lived walked paths first worn in this ancient age. Every Sith Lord who ever rose to power stood on foundations laid by their predecessors. And every conflict between light and dark, from the Clone Wars to the rise of the First Order, echoes battles fought when the Republic was young, and the Jedi were still learning what it meant to be guardians of peace and justice. If you enjoyed this journey through Old Republic lore, please consider subscribing to the Sith Lore channel. Hit that like button and leave a comment letting me know which aspect of this ancient era you'd like to explore in more detail. Should we dive deeper into specific Sith Lords, examine particular battles in greater detail, explore the development of Jedi and Sith philosophies? Your feedback helps guide future content. And remember, This is just one piece of the vast history of the Star Wars galaxy. There are thousands of years of additional stories to explore, from the dawn of the Jedi to the legacy of the Skywalkers. The dark side is patient and eternal, always waiting for its next opportunity. But so is the light, carried forward by those who refuse to surrender hope even in the darkest times. May the Force be with you, always. Now close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and drift into peaceful sleep, knowing that even in a galaxy filled with conflict and darkness, there are always those who stand for something better. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the epic tales of heroes and legends from a time long ago in that galaxy far, far away.